Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. Here I am in London on Cavendish Square, and behind me is H.H. Asquith's house. So, who was Henry Herbert Asquith? Well, he was the penultimate Liberal Prime Minister, and he was the last Liberal Prime Minister to sit in a completely Liberal government, because Lloyd George, who came after him, was a Liberal Prime Minister of a mainly Conservative government. So his house is now the Royal College of Nursing. Anyway, so Asquith is born in 1852 in Yorkshire into a well-to-do family, but he came to school down here. He went to City of London School, and then went to Balliol College, Oxford, and he was called to the bar. So he developed his liberal opinions young. He was president of the Oxford Union, and he prospered at the bar. So then he obviously was elected to the House of Commons, went into politics. He married, had several children. One of his daughters married a Mr. Bonham Carter, and that was quite a well-known dynasty as well. There's the actress Today, who's his great-granddaughter, if I've got that right. Anyway, Asquith, he became Prime Minister in 1908. He'd been Chancellor of the Exchequer beforehand. Sir Henry Campbell Bannerman fell gravely ill, had to resign, and died just a few weeks after he stood down. Asquith became Prime Minister. So the Home Rule crisis came around, and there'd been the People's Budget and various difficulties. People now talk about the Edwardian crisis, starting under Edward VII, continuing into the early years of George V. And then fatefully, Asquith's cabinet took the decision to declare war on Germany in 1914, when the Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated at Sarajevo. The cabinet said, happily, it seems we'll only be spectators in this conflict, but that was not to be the case. And there was this issue of Belgium, the Treaty of London, 1839, Prussia, successor state of Germany, the United Kingdom and others guaranteed the neutrality and independence of Belgium. And when this was infringed, the United Kingdom gave the ultimatum. They had to withdraw, Germany had to withdraw, or the United Kingdom would declare war. You're going to war over a scrap of paper, the German government told the United Kingdom. Other people say, well, that was only the ostensible reason. The ulterior reason for declaring war were other things to do with imperialist rivalry. But there had been a cabinet meeting about this. Should the United Kingdom declare war or not? And at the outset, it appeared that the United Kingdom was not going to. But by the end of the meeting, Churchill and a couple of others had talked the others into it. And that was that. So Asquith had to lead the country to war. Obviously, it was not a discretionary war so many others had been. Well, once it was in, it wasn't something the UK could easily lose. If the UK lost in Afghanistan as they did, or somewhere else, that wasn't going to be fatal. But this was a war against a superpower, and the repercussions of defeat would be grave indeed. So the Liberals had to jettison many of their liberal principles. That brought in Defence of the Realm Act, as in, you weren't allowed to, say, feed animals because it was wasting food. They had to bring in rationing. The state had to assume greater control over all sorts of areas of life. The state started to control railways. There was censorship. Spreading defeatism or despondency became a crime, so freedom of expression was infringed. Should the United Kingdom introduce conscription? The UK was perhaps the only country in Europe not to have compulsory military service. Some Conservatives had agitated for this, but Liberals said, no, that is against our philosophy. We're a free country. If a man wishes to enlist in the Army or the Royal Navy, of course, that's welcome. If he doesn't want to, that's up to him. Even in wartime, we can't fight a war for liberty whilst abolishing our own liberty. That would be nonsensical. However, the situation became so dire, and not enough men were coming forward. This will be all over by Christmas, they said in 1914. Well, by 1916, that most clearly was not the case. And so in January 1916, their Military Service Act became law. Previously had been a Lord Derby scheme. Lord Derby trying to persuade men to sign a pledge that they would voluntarily enlist if called upon to do so, and blah, blah, blah. Trying to get the unmarried men before the married men. Lots of exemptions for those who said, I'm critical to the war industry, I'm in a reserved occupation, I'm a farmer, or I'm a technician at a munitions factory, or I'm a railway driver, something like that. Anyway, a large minority of men were not conscripted, even those who were physically fit. But Asquith's son Raymond, also a member of Parliament, he was killed fighting in France. And H.H. Asquith always had a complicated relationship with alcohol. That's when he really hit the bottle, because he was coping with this bereavement, and Asquith became known as Asquithy. So in December 1916, there was the shells crisis. So many shells had been produced, had been dud, and they were not breaking through, as they'd been led to believe. The Battle of the Somme, well, had been a draw. Some would even say a defeat. I don't think so. The Allies went forward a bit, but obviously not at a price worth paying, absolutely not. So then Lloyd George, with the Conservatives, ousted Asquith. It was a parliamentary coup, a legal one, pushed him out. Perhaps odd because Lloyd George was seen as a radical, and he'd been a hate figure for the Tories back in the South African War of 1899 to 1902, been seen as pro-Boer. Asquith had been a bit like that as well, but Lloyd George was particularly vilified by Conservatives. Nevertheless, the ever-pragmatic Conservatives, with their appetite for office, were willing to serve under the Welsh wizard. So Asquith will remain the official leader of the Liberal Party into the early 1920s. This is on the backbench and a bit curmudgeonly. Then after the First World War in Ireland, when the IRA started to fight against the Crown Forces, and the Crown Forces responded, sometimes used excessive force, sometimes killed civilians, that's when Asquith came into his own again, and he denounced the conduct of the Royal Irish Constabulary Special Reserve, commonly called the Black and Tans, and so on. Anyway, eventually stood down as leader of the Liberals as leader of the Liberal Party, because the party was fatally split between Lloyd George Liberals and Asquith Liberals. The 1918 election, being the coupon election, as Asquith called it, because Lloyd George Liberals and Conservatives agreed not to stand against each other. They were each given a letter saying, yeah, I support the coalition government. A coupon, as Asquith called it. But that's when the Liberals fell from being the second largest party, the largest party actually, to the second, and then eventually to the third. They were replaced by the Labour Party as the opposition in 1922, and they were almost moribund by the 1950s. But Asquith, he lived on till 1928, if memory serves. A very significant political figure. You know, if the First World War hadn't been declared, then liberalism could have flourished, and perhaps they would have remained one of the major parties who could have achieved so much. But the overweening state control occasioned by the First World War appeared to be the very antithesis of liberalism. The notion that mankind was improving was blown to smithereens by the shells and suffocated by the gas of the First World War.